next presentation will be two speakers. It's Katie the Russian and Jessica Hodlr. So they represent an organization called Plan B Passport. Katie is CEO and Jessica is the Chief Operating Officer. It is the organization that helps Bitcoiners obtain more freedom through jurisdictional arbitrage. Welcome.
Thank you, Vera. Thank you. Check, check. Yep.
Check. Yes. Can you hear us all right?
Yep.
All right. Hello, everyone.
I'm Katie.
And I'm Jessica. And we sell passports.
You guys have already gotten a crash course on the flag theory. And in this talk, we're going to describe how jurisdictional arbitrage in combination with Bitcoin will help us short the state. As many of us, I've had my personal aha experience when I realized that the system may not be what it seems like at first. So my aha moment was when I first went through my immigration and first utilized my foreign identity card to kind of play the system. And I was like, that's kind of interesting. So I started looking more and more in that. And the more I was thinking, the more places I've seen where I can play my immigrant hand, let's say. And just like that, I stumbled upon the concepts of jurisdictional arbitrage and flag theory.
So we define flag theory as a way to limit your dependency on any one particular state by obtaining flags in jurisdictions that benefit you in different ways. So to put it into perspective, let's say you're going grocery shopping. You would want to get the best meat from your local butcher. You would want to get your fruits and vegetables from a local farmer's market. And you would want to get your bread at the best bakery. So we like to apply this to jurisdictions. And depending on your goals, you would want to go to a jurisdiction that's best suited for your business depending on different regulations. You would want to go where your funds are most safe. And you would want to go where your family and yourself have the best lifestyle.
So I got very passionate about this topic, as you might say, and that's how Plan B Passport have been born. And at Plan B Passport, we help Bitcoiners obtain second citizenship and residencies and more. So now, the author of Bitcoin Standard, Saif Adinamas, once said that the biggest threat to Bitcoin is governments becoming responsible with their money. Well, in my opinion, the biggest obstacle to a freer future is people not really realizing that they're currently not free. This is why we always like to remind them that things has not always been the way they currently are. And just to jump into that, just to start it off, we want to talk about KYC, or Know Your Customer. And you're all pretty familiar with this topic, unfortunately, but we just want to touch on the history of things a little bit.
So we're all used to showing identification to pretty much go anywhere nowadays. Most, if not all of you, had to show some form of ID to get here, whether that was a driver's license or a passport or any other form of ID. But why is that? Why do we have to show some form of ID when basically doing anything nowadays, whether that's getting on a plane, stay at a hotel, or registering on an exchange? And these KYC requirements were implemented in order to verify someone's identity. But in reality, it basically just created a process of checks and balances that ultimately strips people of their privacy and freedom. Just recently, for those of you who don't know, Celsius recently had to file bankruptcy. They're a lending platform, and everyone was able to see their legal names, where they lived, their addresses, and even the amount of funds they held on their platform. So today, we want to talk about shorting the state and how Bitcoin was the missing piece in this concept of flag theory. But let's first go over a little bit of history. Throughout history, when you look back, the ability to pick and choose where you want to go is deeply rooted in the concept of liberty. I want to briefly go over the Law Lectures by James Wilson. Wilson was one of the few men who signed the Declaration of Independence and the American Constitution. He later became a Supreme Court justice, and his law lectures are a significant exposition and extremely applicable to today. Wilson himself said that everyone is at liberty to choose the state of which he wishes to be a member, and he later recognizes the game theory at play, stating that those states which manage their affairs best will offer the strongest inducements to their own citizens to remain and to incorporate others among them. Basically, this means that the ability to pick and choose where you want to go and where fits you best is deeply rooted in the concept of liberty. But if you don't have access to the majority of the world because of a weak travel document, you're stuck. So what happened?
You open any history book, and there was government there. You open an Old Testament, and there's government there, with the only exception being Garden of Eden. And it's amazing how such a shitty concept have been around for so long. Like, basically, take any point in history, and there was government, and surprise, surprise, government was bad. But it was only bad enough for it to stay intact and for people to accept for what it is, being convinced that for their good. And just like that, we got to the point where they have endless power and monopoly over you. Now, let me ask you a question. How many of you have left the country where they were born and raised and live somewhere else now? We're very good at breaking statistics, but outside of this convention, only 3.5% of people live outside of the country of their birth. Applying this to market terms, only 3.5% turn towards a competitor jurisdiction, making their government of birth and 96% monopoly, having a 96% of market domination. Should I go next step?
Yes. And not only do they have this monopoly, it's nearly impossible to switch jurisdictions due to the complete lack of free market. And if we look at our current reality, we're all born in this non-consensual monopoly, with the state having power over you since you leave your mother's womb. Once you're born, you're assigned a tax number, a passport number, a birth certificate. But why do I need to certify that I'm alive when I'm standing, breathing here in front of you? But they say you need identification in order to verify yourself. So the question is, how did we get here? And if you look back at history, you'll notice that every major increase in identification bureaucracy was implemented during the moment of a crisis. And when I say crisis, you can think of anything majorly impacting those negatively, and that they're not able to react as they would in a normal situation. So I'll go through a couple of examples. First, we had the Panic of 1907, otherwise known as the 1907 Bankers' Panic. And what happened was, over a 3-week period, the New York Stock Exchange fell 50% from its peak the previous year. And how they solved this crisis was through the implementation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, which ultimately led to the centralized control of the monetary system. And more than 100 years later, we are experiencing the major consequences of that. Another example, just 100 years ago, a passport in the form that we know of today did not exist. And they implemented these mandatory passports in 1920 when they met for the League of Nations. And these mandatory passports were, of course, for everyone's safety and would only be temporary. But we all know how that ended. And they actually talked about abolishing passports after World War II. Another example I'll give you. Who here remembers boarding a plane without any major security precautions? Well, I don't. I've only been on a plane after 9/11 security implementations. And if it's so important, why are you able to pay your way out of taking off your shoes? But of course, this was all implemented for everyone's safety, but it's only a requirement for those who can't afford a private jet. And not only that, but in the last 2.5 years, we've seen vaccine passports being implemented, phone contact tracing, extreme limitation of movement. And we have Milton Friedman, who said, "Nothing is so permanent as a temporary government program." And he couldn't have been more right.
As you can see, the moment of crisis is when your power is being taken away from you. And Jessica only mentioned the ones that are relevant to the flag theory, but there are way more draconian regulatory restrictions and removals of privacy that are implemented in every major crisis. You don't function properly in a moment of crisis. Your family doesn't function properly in a moment of crisis. And that's what they want, because this is when they can implement the systems that you would have otherwise rejected. But, we have good news. The crisis ends when the system starts.
In this community, yes, still good? Okay. In this community, we all advocate for self-sovereignty, which typically means we have an overall prepper mentality, being ready to sustain a supply chain collapse, a natural disaster, and much more. And if you're new here, get ready to go down a bunch of different rabbit holes because it's just never ending. But with Bitcoin, we are very well hedged against currency collapse, inflation, seizure of people's savings. But let's be honest, one of the biggest real threats for each and every one of us is the state. And most of you will probably think to yourself, oh, well, I'm not a domestic terrorist. I'm not a criminal. I'm just trying to build parallel structures. Why would I ever face a state actor attack?
I'm sure I don't have to convince you guys, but a couple of memes never hurt. Speaking against the government, aka disloyalty, straight to jail. Distributing raw milk, straight to jail. Want to homeschool your kids? Straight to jail.
But jokes aside, an example of how a perfectly normal, law-abiding citizen can encounter a state attack is having their passport revoked. The EU can revoke your passport based on the grounds of treason or disloyalty. So, for example, Cyprus, Malta, and Ireland can revoke your passport just based on you showing disloyalty through acts or speech. So what will they eventually deem disloyalty and speech against the state? I'll give you another example. What if your government attacks a neighboring nation, and regardless of whether you're pro or against war, you're limited access to financial instruments, you can't travel, you can't get an EU or US visa, and you can't do anything, and you're basically stuck unless you have a second passport. So, I hope by now you're convinced that the biggest real threat for each and every one of us is the state. The state hates you. And even though it may look pretty in pink, I can assure you it's not pretty at all. And as radical as it may sound to some of us, it's about time that we realize it and do something about it.
Preparing against a state actor attack is extremely hard. I mean, you're standing against a gigantic machine with a monopoly on violence and money printers. When encountered a state actor attack, you have three options. You can fight, hide, or run. And why I believe you should mentally be prepared for all three of them, being able to physically leave is extremely important, because in this scenario, you can still fight from afar, and you're somewhat hiding by being outside of attacker's reach, which allows your family to still thrive while avoiding the state of crisis. While relocation or living in a country is a really big move, only two things are absolutely necessary. Number one, being able to bring your money. If only there was an asset that provides us with radical ownership and an ability to move all of your wealth in a borderless manner, maybe one day, fingers crossed. And number two is having your papers in order. Having a plan, or I want to say plan B, is very important. What you should be ready for is your passport, your current passport being weakened or revoked. It's entirely possible, we've seen that happen. And make sure you're welcome in the jurisdiction of your choice. Ever heard of the saying, enemy of your enemy is your friend? So when strategizing for your flag theory, this is something to consider. Look into the geopolitical situation and make sure that the jurisdiction of your choice is not in bad with your previous jurisdiction.
Thankfully, we've got number one figured out with Bitcoin. We often say Bitcoin is freedom, the freedom to trade and transact, freedom to accumulate, the freedom to remain anonymous, and the freedom to leave. So let's talk more about number two. Make sure you're welcome where you end up. Of course, the ultimate solution to this is a second passport. And by the way, you will still have your first passport. That's a question I get a lot. But you can also utilize other tools such as permanent residency, real estate, aka a bug-out home, offshore banking, or having a foreign business entity. And when we talk about having different flags, this is what we mean. A flag can be any one of these options, and you basically have to gather different flags, and you might be asking yourself, well, what are the right set of flags I should be gathering? And I wish I had a one-size-fits-all, you can pick these jurisdictions. But unfortunately, it's dependent on your goals and your threats and attack vectors, and this is what we do on a day-to-day basis.
So in regards to picking the right flags, things change very quickly. In the current world, picking the states that aren't crazy, power-hungry, and don't have a totalitarian regime on the horizon is getting more and more difficult. World leaders change, your priorities change, and the regulatory environments and policies change as well. And if the last 2 years have proved us something, is that nobody is safe of being forced outside of their liberties. Thankfully, Bitcoin is here to be basically our moral compass, the truth upon which we'll build better societal structures. And I really like to say that. Energy finds the path of least resistance, water falls downhill, and libertarians will find freedom. Bitcoin is a borderless money that enables jurisdictional arbitrage to get on the whole another level by removing gatekeepers that hold your money hostage. It also takes away their ability to print endless resources that support their violence. And once the free market of competition between jurisdictions is truly established, there will be, just like in any capitalistic environments, there will be two driving factors: the price race to the bottom and the quality race to the top. And this brings upon a societal transformation, transferring the dynamic of power between authority and people. Now, we bring free market to nation states and now force them to compete for your wealth and the fruits of your labor. And just like that, the sovereign individual thesis plays out. Being able to vote with your feet and vote with your money takes the toll on those imposing crazy regulatory restrictions on you. Now they will be the one losing their power quicker than they can print money. And instead of blaming the government or voting hard and trying to ask them for change, we just take responsibility of our lives and go where our vote with our money and our feet is actually important. But what I want to say, the point I really want to bring across here today, is that just like Bitcoin relies on nodes that rely on node runners, the sovereign individual future relies on you and I to start executing and play the game of jurisdictional arbitrage.
We each have the individual responsibility to push towards a freer world. Each and every one of us needs to do our part in rejecting the plan that they have lined up for us. Life is beautiful, and we have the opportunity to come together, just like today, as a tribe of passionate and freedom-minded sovereign individuals, and we will win. Thank you.
Stack sats, stack flags. Please feel free. Right now, we probably have some time to do a little Q&A, but feel free to scan the QR code. You'll be able to ask us any question online. We'll be happy to help you strategize on your flag theory, and you can also find us on Twitter at these handles.
So we can take 2 questions.
Yeah. Go for it.
Do I get a mic? Or do I... Yes. It's right here. Thank you. So I was just wondering about, when you guys say you sell passports, what does exactly sell mean? So you basically check the requirements for a passport and you help people in the process of getting the passport, or do you actually sell it? Because if you do sell it, and if the state hates you, then why would the state allow you to sell a passport?
No, absolutely.
So what is the legal status exactly of what you do?
They say that you have to describe what you do in 3 words, otherwise you don't know what you're doing. So I sell passport as our short pitch. And I sometimes like to pretend that I'm opening my code and illegally sell passport, but that's not what's actually happening. Basically, we help people strategize for the best flag theory for themselves and then execute in terms of preparing their case for due diligence, submitting their application to the nation that they want to proceed with, and basically walk them through the process from A to Z.
Thank you very much. On your webpage, I didn't see Paraguay. Why is that? It's pretty cheap and easy.
Yeah, so basically we only operate in the Bitcoin market, and we always try to navigate of what Bitcoiners want and basically give them what they want. And we started with just citizenship by investment, and the reason behind that is because, first of all, it's a real capitalistic environment. You pay money, you get the passport, you don't have to visit the place. That's a pure free market in a capitalistic environment. Now, we realize that some people, well, first of all, it's a bear market, so we need to come up with a bear market product for those who want to execute now. So we started releasing other residency programs, and we cater to Bitcoiners. So we understand what they want, and we bring what's necessary.
And we can have one more.
It's almost like there's wind in our mics.
This may be a little bit general, but do you find that people who already have 2 passports presents a big obstacle to getting maybe a passport in a more free country, like what the services you offer the country?
Is your question about can you have more than 2 passports?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's case by case, but generally speaking.
So usually if you can have 2, you can have more than 2. There are some nations that are against dual citizenship, and there's always exceptions, but you have 2 passports, you can freely get 3, 4, and as many as you can get. Appreciate it.
Thank you.